Hello everybody, Jake your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw! It's not Monday, but we're doing a tier list because on Mondays we do tier lists and on Wednesdays we wear pink.
I'm sorry that people are so jealous of me, but I can't help it that I'm popular.
I've just been thinking so much about the meta right now and Inteleon, and I'm here and I'm ready to do this thing. So here will be our Inteleon release tier list. As always, if a Pokemon is very high on this tier list, it doesn't mean it's a must pick. If a Pokemon is very low, it doesn't mean you can't do extremely well with it. This is just a general idea of what these Pokemon are going to look like inside of your games. This isn't fully for a 5 versus 5 competitive mindset. I try to make my tier lists for everybody else, essentially, because things in competitive get a little bit weird with picks and bans and how certain Pokemon receive absolutely no play because another Pokemon is just simply too good in that role. Let's take a look at our tiers for this week. We have our God tier. We only put one Pokemon in our God tier. We're not friggin' Norse around here. We've got our S tier. These Pokemon are so insanely good that it's hard to win when you're against multiple versions of that Pokemon. A Pokemon from the S tier will make it into our God tier, as S tier Pokemon are the only ones that can ascend to Valhalla. We're not friggin' Norse around here. So S is pretty broken. These Pokemon are so dang good. A plus is just a shade under that. They're incredible Pokemon, but they're definitely not a must pick scenario. A tier are very, very solid Pokemon. They are above most every other Pokemon inside the game. B plus tier, these are good Pokemon that I think are above average, but in general, maybe could use a little bit of love or just, hang out at a pretty solid balanced place. B tier is pretty average. I would say balanced, but sometimes B tier feels a little underwhelming. When you have Pokemon that are so good, they wind up in the S tier. We have our C tier, which I think are kind of underwhelming Pokemon, probably need a little love. And then our D tier. The Decidueye Hold on. Do we still have the B tier? How did I blow past the fact that we have the B tier and a B plus tier? This isn't good. I'm starting to become okay with it, and that's not right. We still have the B tier, and it's disgusting. I can't believe even for a moment it didn't stop me dead in my tracks. I'm a little worried about myself. Anyway, we have our Decidueye Memorial tier. This is our lowest tier in Pokemon Unite. These Pokemon definitely need some love in a patch or something like that. Some of them will be getting one very soon. Getting one? Getting some balance. They will be balanced soon. All right, we have a lot of Pokemon to get to. Let's get right into it with our defenders right here. I'm going to put Umbreon up on the list into our S tier, and I'm not even going to, hide it at anybody. Umbreon is our God tier Pokemon of the week. They are insane. This Pokemon is broken with a capital B, and I'm so glad it's going to be getting some nerfs soon. It's just crazy good. Foul Play Snarl is absolutely insane. A lot of Umbreon nerfs coming, and they couldn't come sooner because that Pokemon really is crazy good. S tier choice, however, Slowbro, I don't think is going to be dropping out of the S tier anytime soon unless they start nerfing this Pokemon, of course. Just incredibly useful, incredibly tanky. Its survivability is amazing. Its Unite move is one of the best in the game. It's great at level 4, but it's great before then with Secure. Love me some Slowbro. Lapras has received multiple nerfs. I'll knock it out of our S tier, but I don't think that means it's not one of the better Pokemon inside the game, because it absolutely is. Lapras is great. It's just a little outshined by Umbreon and Slowbro. However, still an incredible choice. Feels more like a fighter than the other two, more of a brawler, kind of a special attack all-rounder almost. Lapras is extremely good. We've got Krusty Boy. I'm not going to mince words. Crustle is a very low-tier Pokemon inside the game right now. It could definitely use some love. It's just rough. And is it D tier? Like, it's still a defender. It has a good Unite move, but at the same time, I feel like it's just completely outclassed by pretty much every other thing inside of its role. I would love to see it get some buffs coming soon. Speaking of a Pokemon getting some buffs, I'm going to throw a Mammo here. I think Mammo's probably B or B plus even, somewhere in this realm. It's not terrible. It's just terrible when you compare it to the other superstar defenders inside the game. Mammo does have some buffs coming, which will be pretty cool. Trevenant, A, A plus. It's somewhere in this realm. It's really good. Really good Pokemon. Somehow outshined because every defender in the game right now is so good. But it's somewhere in this realm. Maybe for just a little variation here, I'll kind of throw it here into the A tier so you can see. I think Lapras is a little bit better than it. But, you know, these are all really solid Pokemon. Honestly, Mammo all the way up, pretty solid, but it starts to get a little crazy up here near the top. Blastoise, I'd say, probably sits here with Trevenant in our A tier. A very good Pokemon, solid damage with the Rapid Spin Water Spout build, also really good control as a tank with Surf Hydro Pump. So I think either way you go with this Pokemon, it's solid, its Unite move is pretty incredible, and yeah, Blastoise is doing really well right now. Greedent. Greedent, I'll also, I never know where to put this Pokemon because it's in a world of its own. There's basically Greedent, Sableye. They hang out in this harasser role. They're very unique in what they do. However, at that, they are good. They're just weird. They're weird to slot into a team. It doesn't feel like it could be your only defender on a team, right? Because it's doing another job. It's doing a weird job. It's like a weirdo, but it's good at what it does. It's really good at what it does, but its job is very bizarre. Snorlax, I think Snorlax kind of hangs out with Mammo, maybe a little better than Mammo for whatever it's worth. You could consider it A tier. It feels like the most reasonable tank in the game. It is the defender. Like when you think of a tank inside of a game, it has some displacement, some crowd control, very bulky, able to really help your team. I feel like that's Slowbro in a nutshell, and I said Slowbro instead of Snorlax, so who knows how long I've been doing that. I think Snorlax is doing pretty dang good right now. Goodra, fine. I think it's B+, B+. I've said for a while Goodra is, not Goodra, it's Midra, and that's about right. I think the recent buffs on this Pokemon have helped it. It's getting some more buffs, which it probably needs. The thing about the Defender class in general is it's just extremely stacked. All of these Pokemon are really good. Even Crustle, who I put all the way down here. The real reason it's down here is because there's no question this Pokemon deserves some attention from the devs at some point. I'm so glad Mammo is also getting some love from the devs. In general, it's weird because we're looking at the tier list like this, but the difference between, it feels like, maybe even Trev and the rest of the defenders here, it does feel like a big chasm sometimes. It really does. It's just that defenders are so good, and some of these Pokemon are so unbelievably good, like Umbreon, that the difference between Umbreon and Crustle is it's kind of disgusting what they've done. So that's the reason Crustle's all the way down there. I hope Crustle gets some love soon too. It's cool that Mammo and Goodra are both getting some buffs coming up very soon. Let's head into let's move over to our all-rounders next. Let's see what all-rounders we want to throw up on our list here. All right, I'll put Zacian. I still think Zacian is one of the better Pokemon inside the game, but I do think they have nerfed it considerably. And I think if this was the level Zacian was released at, it would actually have been pretty great as a release. I think people would have thought it was very powerful and in some ways crazy good, but not so broken that not having it was a detriment. So I actually really like where Zacian is right now. They could probably, honestly, this is going to sound crazy, but they could probably buff slightly the Metal Claw build. That being said, I'm fine with them not touching this Pokemon for a very long time. You want to nerf it again slightly? Be my guest. I'm Lumiere here, so be my guest. But at the same time, I think this is about what we would have wanted for its release. Maybe it could still receive a nerf or two, but it's really good, but not as broken as it used to be. It's weird how now I'm conditioned to thinking like, it's S tier, it's pretty good. I honestly think it could even be A+. I'm not even lying. Don't catch me lying. Who's next? Buzzwole. I think Buzzwole's awesome right now. Buzzwole's so good. High skill ceiling Pokemon. A lot more difficult to play than something like Zacian in a lot of ways. But if you start to understand the flow of Buzzwole, it is massively powerful. Massively powerful. I think this Pokemon is still, oddly enough, slept on in a lot of ways. It slots into a team weird. It's a top lane all-rounder, but some people, for whatever reason, I feel like they think it's like a defender, and I still think this Pokemon wants a defender on its team. Let's see. Dragonite, I think it's doing pretty good. A, maybe? I'm I'm not fully sold on it being A+, even though it's solid. It's really, really solid right now. It's ranged, it has a good secure move, and because of that, it wins games. I like Dragonite. I could hear an argument for it being even slightly higher, but I think in this realm is very fair. It's a really good Pokemon right now, especially the Hyper Beam build. Really good. Lucario. I've said for a long time, I think Lucario is still about A, maybe even B+. Lucario is getting a buff coming up. Actually, some really cool buffs coming up for Lucario, so we'll see how this affects this Pokemon. I think they could be kind of making it crazy again, especially the extreme speed build, but we're just going to have to see what that looks like on Lucario coming up here. Still a very solid choice. Zarina, awful. This Pokemon's awful. It's like so rough. I don't know what happened to Zarina, man. I think Zarina has fallen off more than maybe any Pokemon inside the game. It is so weak in comparison to what it was. So weak. I know people who are cracked with it can still make some amazing plays with it, but man, I think Zarina is just rough. Machamp, very good. Machamp is weird. Not enough people play it, but it's just got incredible burst damage. It has great engage. Its Unite move's incredible. Machamp is still a very, very good Pokemon, and I think a lot of times you'll really benefit from having Machamp in that kind of all-rounder slot on your team. Garchomp's another one. Very good. The Dragon Claw combo is incredible. Rapid Fire Scarf was a huge win for this Pokemon in general. So were some buffs that it got. Dragon Claw into either fighting or right into a Unite move is just such a huge win for your team, especially when you're dealing with a lot of these squishier special attackers that are inside the game right now. I think Garchomp is doing pretty well. Same thing with Azumarill. I think Azumarill's awesome. Azumarill's super slept on. It got a buff, and that buff was nice. I really, really like this Pokemon. It finally has gotten up to kind of a reasonable win rate. It was over 50%. Now I think it's like barely under 50%, but this is a really solid Pokemon. The build's definitely Aqua Tail, in my opinion. Char is a weird one. I feel like Char always kind of goes back and forth with me between A and then maybe slightly lower than A. The buffs it got recently brought it out of this like horrid place that Charizard was in for a long time. But I will say in games, so this is like the hardest thing to figure out, is the top end like player on this Pokemon sometimes can be pretty incredible, but I think most of the time you see this in game and it's unfortunately just not as dynamic and useful as it possibly could be. I think Char's pretty good, but it seems like, you know, when it gets its Unite move canceled, or when someone, you know, has a Slowbro or something, plucks it out of the air, or even someone's playing Umbreon, it's like, yeah, I don't even care that you're hitting me with fire. I think it just doesn't perform particularly well into certain things in the meta right now, but I don't think it's bad at all either. T-Tar, I do not like T-Tar. I don't like T-Tar in the game right now. I don't really think it's Zarina levels of like, well, sometimes it is arena levels of being rough. Leveling takes forever. It just feels like it gets sort of, for lack of a better term, kited by a lot of the Pokemon around. They just kind of kite it, as they often say, but it's true. This Pokemon just feels like it really does not have that much impact in the game right now. Even late game when it finally becomes T-Tar, it feels like it needs a lot. Scissors, fine. B+, maybe. I don't know. I don't like Scissor much in the game right now at all. I think the meta is not good for Scissor. However, I think the buffs were nice for this Pokemon. Its Unite move is pretty good against some of the squishier Pokemon. I do not love Scissor. I know there are a lot of Scissor fans out there. I really don't think this Pokemon compares to a lot of what's inside the meta right now. You've got the Scyther version of Scissor, which is essentially a Speedster. I can talk about it with our Speedsters here in a little bit. Aegislash, I think, is probably good. It might even be A, honestly. Not a lot of people play it, and I think because of that, it's kind of hard to see its value as much. I also think Umbreon shuts it down pretty hard because Umbreon's right up in its face. A lot of Pokemon don't want to be up in its face so much, but Umbreon feels like into something like Brawler and Bruisey, you would assume that you wouldn't want to be in their face, but Umbreon can kind of make that happen and not stress too much about it. I don't think it's bad, really, at all. I think everything here in the B+ tier is super playable. I'm not crazy in love with it. I thought the buffs would maybe do more for it. We're going to have to see if more people decide to pick this thing up, especially once it gets a crown on its head. Two more all-rounders. We got our Shifu right here, both versions of it. I'm not really sure exactly how to split this up because in different ways these Pokemon are busted. One's busted in a way that's so good at securing, and one's busted in a way that's so good at fighting. I usually flip-flop between these two of like where I want to put them exactly. I'm gonna set Water in S, and I'm gonna set Dark Bear in A+. I think in most of your games, you're going to see Water Bear do more, even though I think Dark Bear is insanely good. I just think most of the games you play, whether you are playing Rapid Strike or Shifu or an ally is, I think you're going to see this do a little bit more than this because this level 5 is so good. And once it gets level 5, it's kind of one of the most powerful level 5s inside of Pokemon Unite. Okay, we've done all of our all-rounders here. Let's move back to our supports here for a second. We're going to do our attackers last because the most recent Pokemon release was Inteleon, so we'll talk about them last. All the supports in the game are doing really well right now. I think Wiggly is kind of the most mid, probably, of all of our supports. You could maybe put it up into the B+, but I think it's just kind of mid, and I think Umbreon counters it super hard. Umbreon completely takes its Unite move away from it and allies. I think because of that, Wiggly's kind of hanging out in B. It is getting a buff soon, which I think will help it out a little bit. But I think Wiggleon... Let's take a sip of coffee. I think Wiggleon's doing okay. So Wiggly is good, not great, and countered hard by the meta. So that's kind of why I'm putting it here in our B tier. It feels like it gets countered harder than most every Pokemon inside the meta. It's just Umbreon is such a disaster for it. Let's see. Mr. Mime, I think, is Mr. Fine. B+, probably. It's fallen out of favor because it was so unbelievably busted at one point that I think people have forgotten, but it's still a pretty solid choice. Now, I don't really know exactly where to put Sableye, because I still think Sableye is kind of a nonsense creature that does about what it did before, but it did get some nerfs. I'm going to tentatively put it here in our B+ tier. It could probably be higher. It could probably be up here in the A tier, kind of with something like Greedent. Again, it does what it does. But they did nerf it across the board a little bit, so I'll put it here in B+ for a little while, but I still think you're going to be quite annoyed dealing with a Sableye. All right, our next one's Comfey. I didn't know how hard this Pokemon fell. I would say it did not fall that hard at all. I'm going to put it up in our A+ tier. Still extremely good. You'll also see that it was a huge player at the recent tournament here, NAIC. I think this Pokemon is still incredibly good. And when you see a team that uses Comfey well, it's really hard to shut down a dominant carry Pokemon with this thing around its neck. I saw Zacian and Comfey a little while back, and it was still Zacian and Comfey. So there you go. Where do we go next? Blissey, incredibly good. A+, somewhere in here. It's insanely good. Same thing with Clefable. I think these Pokemon... a lot like our defenders, our supports are game-changing inside the game. Having one on your team as opposed to not having one, I feel like you're already in a position to possibly lose because you just don't have this amazing thing that will keep your team healed and strong. Eldegoss, Hoopa. I'm putting both of these into our S tier. I've talked about these before, kind of in this sort of same way. I really think that what Hoopa does is singular. It's so good, and nothing can really do that, right? It's also amazing early. It can run EXP share. It just does so many valuable things. And Eldegoss, in a way, is kind of like that. It's so incredibly good early. It's a Pokemon that can easily run EXP share. Its Unite move is pretty game-changing in a lot of big fights. It does damage. It heals all of your allies. It adjusts where enemies are. It makes you invulnerable. And then at the same time, it has a team-wide shield. And it has incredibly reliable healing. I just think Eldy is, it's great. And it's always a high win rate, which I do have to... There are times where I go, well, this is how I feel about this Pokemon. But then I have to look at it, how consistent some of these are. And I just have to say, yeah, that's why it sits where it sits. It's so incredibly consistent. It's so good early. When you think of its role... There really isn't much else that it could do better. It does its role so well. And then again, for Hoopa's in a very similar boat. And its Unite move is one of the most absurd, game-changing Unite moves that has ever existed inside of Pokemon Unite. So there we go. Those are our supporters, all of which I think are really, really good inside the game right now. Let's move on to our Speedsters. Our Speedsters. We have a recent addition to Speedsters. That is Leafeon. Leafeon I don't think is broken, but I think it's extremely good. Extremely good. Like, it's also getting a buff. I can't remember which. I think Solar Blade is getting a buff, which is going to be wild. At level 4, that move buffed is going to be pretty crazy. The build right now is Leaf Blade, Razor Leaf, right? I think I'm saying that right. I'm saying Leaf a lot. Leafeon, Leaf Blade, Razor Leaf, Leaf. So this Pokemon's great. It's a true speedster, high burst, but also very squishy. It has its Unite move back every 2 seconds, which is amazing. Not literally, but it's just so incredibly good. I love Leafeon right now. Gets good at level 4, so you can make some really sneaky plays with this Pokemon. I think an awesome speedster right now. Dodrio, I think, sits right up there in this A+ tier. It's almost S for me, but as I say all the time, and it's very true with Umbreon, so many things just counter this Pokemon so hard. I think it's incredibly reliable, especially as a solo carry Pokemon. One of the better solo carries in the game, one of the better speedsters in the game. It doesn't feel broken to me, but in the right hands, it does feel like a dominant force inside of a match. If we're going to talk about a broken speedster, in my opinion, that's Zoroark. I think Zoroark is the most broken speedster inside the game. It's getting a nerf. It deserves a nerf. It probably deserves more, honestly, especially if someone is a high skill level player with this Pokemon. I really think Zoroark is just kind of in a league of its own. It's pretty busted. Its ability to chase things down is unparalleled. The way you combo into a feint, into your next move, like you can follow something across the entire map or get away from just about anything and pick up massive KOs. I think the more and more I see it, the more and more I recognize that this thing is busted. However, it requires a very good pilot. All right, our next speedsters here are all varying levels of all right. I would say for me, Scyther is maybe B+, BB+, somewhere in this realm here. It's good. It's good, not great. I mean, maybe if Scyther's B+ and Absol's B, like B on this list right now, I don't know. It doesn't feel that amazing. Gengar's probably C, probably. It's so rough into these tanky Pokemon. And so is Absol, honestly. Maybe both of these are kind of C right now. And this is the Speedster dilemma that we're running. Like, you're seeing it in real time. I feel like the Speedster dilemma is they are either all the way tuned up to the busted tier, or they are all the way down in the non-busted tiers. Zeraora, for the longest time, this Pokemon's needed love. It's finally getting it. Be prepared, by the way, for this thing to shoot up a tier list, because this Pokemon is finally getting its levels changed. It's getting a buff to discharge. Get ready, because Zeraora is going to be really good. Talon's good-ish. It's like B+. It's somewhere in here. I don't know, I think Talon's a little better than Scyther for whatever it's worth at times. And then at other times, the direct Unite move KOs are a little better. Here's the thing. Talon avoids a lot of the nonsense that's going on inside the game and then bursts pretty well. Scyther, I feel like, has this insane amount of burst, but it has to burst into these Pokemon that are just so beefy. I don't know. I'm not in love with it. I'll even slightly put Talon above it, even though I do think Talon, compared to other speedsters, could probably use above. I could probably put Talon B, honestly, and that would be fair. High skill Pokemon, I love playing it, one of my favorite to play, but it's definitely not Dodrio, Leafeon, Zoroark territory, so I think that's actually a fair place for it. As we move on to our attackers, attackers get a song and the others don't. All right. We have our attackers here. Inteleon was the most recent release, so we're going to talk about that Pokemon last. Let's go through some of our attackers. Mew. Mew is either S or A+. It's again, it's like a Hoopa in the sense that it's in a whole world of its own. It does its own thing. It's completely unique, and what it does is very incredible. It's finally gotten to the point where most players you see with it will not be busted. So I think it would be fair to put something like this in the A+ tier. I don't think it's as easy as all the things in the S tier, but I think with a reasonable level of skill, it's still a busted Pokemon. So take that for what you will. I'm going to put it S because I do think a reasonably skilled person with this Pokemon is still insanely good. Glaceon, A+. I know it's gotten some nerfs. This Pokemon's still great. Like, it's still really great. Both builds are still really, really great. Solid Pokemon and becomes great at level 4, and both builds are still solid. Duraludon, hey buddy. I think Duraludon is an A+ as well. I don't know how long that's going to last because it is getting some weird reworks that overall kind of feel like possible nerfs for this Pokemon. Duraludon, always high win rate. It's because it secures things so well. It looks like that actually might be changing. So be prepared possibly for Duraludon to finally fall. We're going to have to see here. Espeon, I think, is a really solid Pokemon. A, maybe even A+ would be fair for this. Slick Spoon's incredible on it. Stored Power or Psyshock are good. Solid Unite move. After the Battle Pass buffs a while back, I think this Pokemon's been sitting pretty. And of course, since Slick Spoon, I like it a lot. I think A or even A+, very fair place to put it. I'll talk about Sylveon as well. I think Sylveon's really good. A is very solid. Like, everything in this A tier, these are all really solid choices. You'll always be happy to have one of these on your team as long as, you know, they're not backcapping during Ray, which, you know, you can't, that could be any Pokemon, by the way. All right. Yesterday, who was it? I think it was our Tyranitar. It was someone. They were our highest level on our team. They completely they left everything behind. They left their whole family behind to go backcap during Ray. And it's like, you're the one to fight. All right. So there we go. Sylveon, I think A tier. Very solid choice right here. Let's see. Chandelure. I think A+ is fair for this Pokemon. It is getting a nerf, but I do still think it'll be a very, very good Pokemon. The overheat build's getting a little nerf, so enjoy it while it lasts. That's my favorite way to play this Pokemon. I think it's very solid. I actually don't really think it needs much of a nerf, but maybe if it's a slight nerf and it brings it down to A, I think that would be pretty fair for this Pokemon. Alola Ninetales, A+. Great. I mean, we're kind of past the craze of Alola, like, oh my gosh, Alola Ninetales, look at it go. But it's so good. So good early, so good in Path. Blizzard Avalanche is insane. Unite move is great. Alola Ninetales is doing really great. And it's basically what you're seeing is just this Slick Spoon dominance. All of these Pokemon do extremely well because of Slick Spoon. And yeah, they are doing well. Guardy. I think Guardy's probably an A tier Pokemon. Really solid. Good damage. It doesn't blow me away. It doesn't feel as busted as some of the others, but it's still a really, really competent Pokemon. Really fun one to play too. And ever since they changed this leveling, it's been nice. And then the Slick Spoon helps it out quite a bit. Delphox, I feel like sits in this position as well. It may be, so I think A+ is fair for the Flame Charge build of this, and then A is maybe a little more fair for the Fire Spin build. Both still good. I do think it feels like for whatever reason, Delphox has not been as relevant as it used to be. That might have something to do with some of the speedsters making Delphox's life horrible. I'm not really sure what it is about Delphox. I just don't feel like it's as impactful as it used to be. Still a really solid choice, though. I think A is a fair place to put this Pokemon. Venusaur. We're seeing a lot of love for Venusaur. The Solar Beam build, the Beamosaur build has been crushing it, getting competitive play. I think this Pokemon's doing pretty well right now. Either way you slice it, it's still both slightly under, you know, a 50% win rate, but there are a lot of good special attackers, and I feel like it's sometimes hard to find exactly where you want to slot this thing in. Also, you know, both builds are punishable slightly in different ways, so while this Pokemon is doing really well, I don't think I could put it higher than the A tier. Who's next? Pikachu. I'm gonna put Pikachu down in either B or C. I really like Pikachu, but there's no question that it is falling behind its other special attack counterparts, and it could use a little love. Just a little something, a little bit of a touch-up if you wanted to compete with the other special attackers, even though I think it's doing pretty well in a lot of ways. It feels like a good support attacker. Cram, A+. Congratulations, Cram. You got yourself an A+, and you've shifted my tier list. Let me fix this. 1 second here. Oh, I did it. That actually wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. We fixed it. All right, Graham. Very nice. I think I'm going to have to fix it anyway because something else I think is going into our A+ tier. Moving on. Graham doing pretty well inside the meta right now. Surf Hurricane, meh. But Dive Air Slash, an extremely good build for this Pokemon, even though it's pretty underused. Now we have our ADCs, our attack damage carries, and then Inteleon, which is kind of a special attack damage carry, a ADC. And where do we want to begin? Well, let's begin with Greninja. I think Greninja's good, not great. It's either B or B+. It's still a solid hyper carry, especially if you're good with it. It's a crazy strong carry Pokemon, but at the same time, it just feels like it's a little... All of these Pokemon feel like they're a little outdone by all of the special attackers inside the game right now, and sometimes it feels like it's a little hard to find your ins with something like Greninja because everything is so tanky. Decidueye, a little better than Greninja. I think it's either A, maybe A+, but extremely punishable. That's the thing about Decidueye. It's just like... You know, if this was a kid, it would always be grounded. That is Decidueye's thing. Spirit Shackle is amazing, way easier to hit than Inteleon Snipe Shot. And it's also just, you could bully it all day long. I think a solid Pokemon, but also really, really counterable. Cinderace, I think, hangs out right here with Greninja. It's either here or here. It's really close. I think Cinder might be a little more consistent than Greninja. Greninja probably requires... They require a different skill set. Greninja requires you to be able to accurately know when you can dive in to engage, and Cinderace requires the ability to continue to keep amazing spacing against your opponents. Both solid Pokemon though, really, really solid. And they're both, you know, strong carries, so they're great. I would say that our little Dragapult here is probably an A tier choice. It's really good. It always has a higher win rate than Greninja and Cinderace for whatever reason. I think it's because its Secure Move is so incredibly powerful. Secure moves change games and they change outcomes of how things happen. Dragapult also just really powerful in general, able to chain lots of KOs using its moves and then pick up, you know, easy sort of last hits that other Pokemon would not get with its Unite move. That resets your moves. Boom, you're right back in it, chaining more KOs. So I think that's why it kind of outpaces these two Pokemon, even though it feels like it does it very slyly. And now we have our final Pokemon on the list. We have Inteleon. Let me tell you, everyone was telling me when this Pokemon came out, it was B. It was like B, it's gonna have a sub 50% win rate. And I'm not saying it won't, by the way, it might. But the more I play this Pokemon, the more I realize people were way off on their initial assessment of this, and I feel like I was way off on my initial assessment where I thought like maybe B+ or something like that. The more time I spend with it and the more I recognize how broken, truly broken its early game is. Its Secure with Water Gun is so unbelievable. You can dominate any path, you can invade enemy central area. There's really nothing anyone can do about this Pokemon, and even if an enemy Pokemon falls below 50% health, you can pretty consistently punish it with a KO, which seems kind of insane. So I think a lot of people initially thought it was kind of here. And to be fair, Snipe Shot, Fell Stinger, they maybe fall closer to B, B+. I'm swinging for the fences here, but I really believe it. I believe Inteleon is an A+ Pokemon. I really do. Now let me fix my list. All right, there we go. So Inteleon, I don't think makes it into our S tier, but I think once you understand what this Pokemon does and recognize this is a very high skill Pokemon, this is actually way better than people think. Like way, way, way better than people think. I'm surprised to be saying that this Pokemon is this good. You could make an argument maybe that it's A. I'm not going to freak out at you if you think that. But if you think this Pokemon is lower, I'm telling you, you don't recognize how massive its Secure is. And then you're not fully aware of like what it can do as the match progresses. It's just incredibly good, and I did not think I would be putting it here in our A+ tier. So there is our tier list, our Inteleon tier list. There are a lot of Pokemon that are lower on this list that are going to be getting some buffs soon, which is pretty cool. And there are Pokemon that are higher on this list that are going to be getting a few nerfs, which is also very, very cool. And now, of course, this. Inteleon is completely busted. It's the most broken Pokemon in the game. That is why it's our god tier Pokemon of the week. No, I'm not kidding. The only thing that can really stop it, ironically, somehow Zarina back in the meta specifically to counter Inteleon. Because all of its moves, Triple Axle, Stomp, all of its dashes can hit Inteleon when it's cloaked, and you can use its Unite move then to throw it up in the air, and you can cancel the best Pokemon inside the entire game. As we talked about earlier, Zacian's terrible now. There's no reason to play this Pokemon. It's awful. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you all next time. We did it.